I'd like to invite members of the Israel-Europe panel to come up on stage, together with Jerusalem Post diplomatic correspondent Herb Kanan, who will be moderating it. Unfortunately, the president of the Israeli Jewish Congress, Vladimir Slutsky, could not make it today, so we're going to hear a few words from the CEO, Michel Gurary. So please, members of the panel, if you can come up on stage, and Michel as well. Herb will be introducing each member, but firstly, let's hear from Michel Gurary.
Distinguished guests and dear friends, I'm Michel Gurary and the CEO of the Israeli Jewish Congress. Unfortunately, our president was delayed on his way back to the country, so I will say a few brief remarks on his behalf, with also a personal note. First of all, we are honored to be the partner of the Jerusalem Post for this very timely and very important panel on Europe and Israel relations. IJC is an independent Israeli-based organization with two principles. The first one, to promote the principle of the State of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, and the second, to reinforce the relations between Israel and the Jewish diaspora, especially the European Jewry. So we are the voice of the European Jewry in Israel, but we are also the voice of the European Jewish community of Israel vis-à-vis Europe. And we know, according to our survey, that we have approximately 1 million Israelis who are already EU citizens who are eligible to receive this EU citizenship. So for us, the partnership with Europe is very, very important, and therefore we also launched the European Forum of the Knesset, and we also partner with EFI, the Parliamentary Association of European Friends of Israel. But this relation also has some big challenges, and I would like to quote, especially about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, to quote our president. We are concerned by increasing attempts in Europe to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. Such moves, we believe, are counterproductive, only rewarding Palestinian intransigence, and by the way, also not recognizing Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, terror, exacerbating the conflict, not bringing the parties together and closer. When we saw in the continental Europe that in the last 2 years we have 14 people who were brutally murdered because they were Jews, or if we remind that we have in a demonstration in Geneva a sign saying in a demonstration against Israel that every synagogue is an Israeli embassy, we are concerned that maybe in Europe we are facing the boiling frog syndrome. And we are sure that for the moment the European pot is eating faster. And therefore, we would like that the people in Europe and the people of Israel will understand that they are facing a new storm, a new tsunami, in order to escape and not to be caught and to be trapped with some suffocation in the next years. Dear friends, as we have many dark clouds upon our heads, we have also a lot of opportunities. And we have to keep this in mind, that we have many things to do together regarding trade, research, culture, also joint security concerns. So let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the panel this afternoon entitled Europe and Israel Facing Threats and Opportunities. It's a rather large topic for 50 minutes, but we'll give it our best shot. Hardly a day goes by when there's not a headline somewhere out there about one European parliament or another recommending the recognition of a Palestinian state, or threats of possible sanctions against settlement products, or actions to divest from Israel, or drawing European red lines beyond which Israel is unable to go in the West Bank, or anti-Israel protests, or more darkly, anti-Semitic incidents. There are harsh condemnations very regularly of Israeli actions, coupled with statements and veiled threats that the EU's ties with the parties in the region will be dependent on movement in the peace process. And Europe has already decided, to a large extent, what a solution should look like: a Palestinian state along the 67 borders with mutually agreed land swaps and a capital in East Jerusalem. And all that has created a perception among many in Israel, a perception fueled by remarks made not infrequently by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman about European double standards and hypocrisy, that Europe is against us, that Israel has essentially lost Europe. And over the next few minutes, I hope to examine that perception and see if it fits in with the reality, or is, as our Jewish, kind of Israeli Jewish penchant, are we overly focusing only on the negative and as a result ignoring the positive elements in our relationship with Europe? Are we missing the bigger picture with Europe and missing the more sanguine elements of the ties? To help us look at those issues, we have on the panel today Italian Ambassador Francesco Mario Tallo, Danish Ambassador Jesper Var, Aviv Shiron, the Foreign Minister's Deputy Director General for Western Europe, who served previously as Israel's ambassador in Switzerland and Austria, Jerusalem Post senior contributing editor Karen Glick, and Nathan Gilbart from Germany, who is the chair of Karen Yesod. The format of the panel will be an introductory question to each of the panelists, in which they will have 4 minutes to reply, and the rest of the time will be taken up by dialogue. I want to start with the ambassador, the Italian Ambassador Tallo. Italy is presently the president of the EU. Overall, how do you gauge the relationship? Is it as bad as it seems, or are there opportunities here that we're just not paying enough attention to?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think that, like you said, it's very much about perceptions. I think we have to work a lot on this. There is probably not the best and correct perception of Israel in the European public opinion. And maybe the same is for Europe in Israel. And that's why we are working exactly on the opposite direction of boycott. Because boycott means isolation, make the Mediterranean Sea wider. We want to make the Mediterranean Sea part of a common ground, a place where we can work together, Israel, Europe, and of course the other countries, the Arab countries in that place. That's why we welcome all the visits of people from Europe in Israel, the other way around, and I invented an acronym which is, I think, the opposite of BDS. It's PDS. It's promote, develop, and sustain. We want to promote, develop, and sustain the relationship. This is what we do actually every day. This is why, for instance, in my home we had 4,000 people during last year, people coming from the academia, business people, students, and scientists, all sorts of people. To continue on the good side, we are, and this is a fact, but the largest trade partner of Israel. Israel buys from Europe, sells to Europe, so there is a net of interest which is too strong not to be developed, not to be appreciated. But of course, we must better understand what does it mean, what is the reality of Israel, what is the reality of Europe. And certainly in Europe we have problems. There is this scourge of anti-Semitism, you mentioned it, and every single episode, also the slightest one, it's really something terrible. We have to fight this with the utmost determination. I will remember that in July, during the Gaza crisis, 4 European ministers made a very strong statement against the trend to make confusion between possible critics of Israel with real anti-Semitism and with violent manifestation which happened in some European cities. This is something that we cannot accept. And we have to work because this is, of course, linked with the old memories in Europe and here. And I'm flying the next days to Rome on Monday. We will have, in the framework of the program of our presidency of the European Union, a big conference. For the very first time, educators from all the European countries are coming to discuss about education on Shoah. So this is a program promoted by Yad Vashem, together with the Italian Education Ministry as presidency of the European Union. And for the first time, we are doing this all together, not bilaterally. I think this is an act, something concrete. It's just the beginning. We have to work much more. The same is here. I mean, Europe is not only something bad. We are part of the same civilization. I wish to remember that Prime Minister Renzi, the Italian head of government, started the semester of presidency of the European Union with a speech in the European Parliament, as we do. It's a very important speech with this program. And he wanted to mention Israel in his speech. And the phrase was, Israel has not only the right to exist, Israel has the duty to exist. I think that one should think about this phrase for its implication. I think it's the first time that someone says outside Israel that it's a duty for Israel to exist toward the world. We feel the need of Israel. And therefore, then we can think all about the relationship. We can have differences. It's normal. But we are partners.
Let me pick up on the thread and ask Ambassador Sharon. Look, there's a widely held perception in Israel that we're losing Europe, that one more announcement of another batch of houses in Givat HaMatos or Gush Etzion or another military campaign in Gaza, and Europe will continue to turn the screws, and this could lead to a situation first of boycotts of settlement products and then of boycott of Israeli products and boycott of Israel in general. How serious are the boycott threats? Are we losing Europe, and what can we do to regain it?
Are we losing Europe? I don't think so, although it's exactly the case if I would be asked to summarize the situation with Europe in one word, I would say good, and in two words, not good. And yes, it's the tension between those two definitions. Yes, we have problems in Europe, we have problems with Europe, but at the same time, I think, and I know it's obvious, but I think it is important for us Israelis to repeat it, that we share common principles and values. We have the same free and democratic political systems. We have pluralistic societies. We enjoy free and solid economies. There's no doubt about the fact that if we talk about like-minded countries, Israel is the most, if not the only, like-minded country to Europe in the Middle East. The historic, cultural, even personal ties between Israel, Israelis, and Europe cannot be broken, cannot be ignored. We have political differences and we have problems with parts of the public opinion in Europe. We have BDS and we have a rise in anti-Semitism. But I think there are ways to challenge or to face those challenges, and we in the Foreign Ministry and the Israeli authorities are giving much thought to that. And just yesterday we had a 4 hours meeting on our working programs in Europe for the embassies for the coming year. And I just returned from Brussels, where I led the Israeli delegation to the consultations of the political subcommittee between Israel and the European Union. Yes, there were differences who came on the table, but I think the overall judgment, both ours and that of the Europeans taking part in these consultations, was positive, and I think this is the way to look at things.
Danish Ambassador Var, your parliament today is going to vote on whether or not to recognize a Palestinian state. What good do those votes really do? And how do you respond to those, including the Prime Minister, who said that moves like this just make any agreement more distant because it reinforces among the Palestinians the idea that they can take maximalist positions and that the world will support them and that they won't need to negotiate? What good are these parliamentary votes, and what's going to happen in Denmark?
Well, first of all, I think the votes reflect a keen interest on the part of Danish politicians and the Danish public on the Middle East peace process. Denmark is committed to a two-state solution, but Denmark is also concerned about the stalemate in present circumstances. We are concerned about facts being established on the ground, the settlements, etc., etc. That's to explain why it emerges in Parliament and why two parties have put forward a motion that obliges and would oblige the government to recognize the state of Palestine within pre-67 borders and to grant Palestine full diplomatic rights. Now, it's always a little bit difficult to predict members of parliament. I've noticed it here in Israel, and that also holds good in Denmark. But I will make the prediction that not only the government, but also many other parties, in fact, a vast majority in the Danish parliament, is going to reject this proposal. Reject the proposal to recognize the state of Palestine. And why is that? Is it because we don't believe in the two-state solution? No, not at all, as I explained. Do we not want to see an independent state of Palestine? We do. And that goes again across the board in the Danish parliament. But it is not the view of the Danish government that unilateral Danish recognition of the state of Palestine is fruitful in the present circumstances. It is not the view that it will help a two-state solution, and therefore they are not taking that measure. It is generally the view that recognition of the state of Palestine should emerge as a result of a negotiation and not in the present circumstances as an instrument to achieve it. And if indeed it were to be the case that there would be recognition at some point in the future, I think it would be a preferable approach to do so in unison with other countries rather than to do it unilaterally. So that's the state of play.
So you're saying that the Danish parliament is going to be the first parliament in Europe to actually push back against this trend for recognition of Palestine?
It would look like it, yes.
Is that significant, Aviv? Is it significant if the Danish parliament takes this move?
I think it's significant. I think that I must admit that I find it a bit strange. I'm not referring now directly to the Danish parliament, but that parliaments in Europe take the liberty. It's their legitimate right to debate the recognition of a Palestinian state, and at the same time, Europe criticizes the Israeli parliament debating a Jewish state. This is a bit strange, and this is what we are trying to explain to our friends in Europe.
Carolyn, let me ask you, please, does it matter what Europe thinks? How much weight should Israel give to European statements, European condemnations, European threats of boycotts? And where should Israel turn to compensate, perhaps, for the loss of Europe? I mean, as it's been mentioned here before, Europe is our number one trading partner.
You know, Europe is our number one trading partner, but and by the way, trade with specific European countries, some of them that are the most outspoken critics of Israel, like Britain, for instance, is rising all the time. So, you know, I think that we have to separate the political from the economic. I think that the business is business, and diplomacy is diplomacy in many ways. And so the notion that they're going to abandon us as a trade partner, you know, where are they going to get their pharmaceuticals from? Where are they going to get their high-tech from? They need us as well, and we shouldn't undervalue our own importance to the economies of Europe just because they're increasingly hostile to us on issues that are truly important to us. I think that it's also important to note here that the hostility that we're experiencing from Europe is completely unconnected to anything that Israel does. I mean, you know, the talk and the implementation of trade sanctions, and let's be clear, they say it's against settlement products or products built outside of the 1949 armistice lines, but of course they're Jewish products. This is an anti-Jewish boycott. This is not an anti-settlement boycott because they're not boycotting Arab businesses in these areas. They're only boycotting Jewish ones. It's important to note that. But these trade sanctions that they're undertaking against Israel and Jews are being undertaken whether we're having peace talks with the Palestinians, we're not having peace talks with the Palestinians. They announced the initial trade sanctions the same day that the peace talks were announced by John Kerry last May. So, I mean, this happens without relationship to this. They are recognizing the non-existent state of Palestine as also an act of hostility towards Israel, right? They're doing it. Who was it that did it the same day as the massacre in Har Nof? I mean, these are acts of violence that are being incited by the Palestinian Authority government, right, that they're supporting, acts of wanton murder of Jews in prayer, and at the exact same time, there was a Spanish parliament recognized Palestine the same day. So, you know, it has no relationship whatsoever to events on the ground, whether there's a peace process, whether there's not a peace process. It has absolutely no relationship to what the Palestinians are doing. And in terms of how we should be thinking about this, look, I'm not suggesting that Israel should counter this unlawful economic war that the Europeans are undertaking against us with trade sanctions of our own against Europe. Although if any Israeli business decides that they don't want to do business with Europe, that's certainly understandable. But I think, you know, that we're already seeing that we're expanding our markets into India and into China in very profound ways, and that's only going to increase vastly in the years to come, and I think that's extremely important for us to minimize the amount of damage they can do to our economy. And I think that business is business, and we should continue to do business, and we should care a lot less about what they're doing to us on a diplomatic level, because again, the steps that they're taking against Israel are not related to anything that Israel does. They're doing them on their own time, for their own reasons, regardless of what Israel is doing at any specific moment.
But those steps are still significant. I mean, how can you ignore significant steps?
I'm not saying to ignore them, but I'm saying that we should not lose our heads over this. Because, you know, you can only do what you can do. If you have countries that have decided that the most important thing for the new Swedish government, right, the inaugural statement by the new Prime Minister of Sweden, he thinks that the most important domestic issue, right, that he has to address in the Swedish parliament is recognition of a non-existent state whose leaders seek openly the destruction of Israel, right? What are we supposed to do about that? Did we do anything against the new Swedish government that this is what he should be doing in his inaugural speech? No. So are we supposed to lose sleep over this irrationality on the part of Europe? You can only worry about things that you can actually shape. When you see that these steps are being taken against Israel, and by the way, here's one last point. You know, I mean, I have two more points, but maybe you'll get back to me on the third one. But the other point is that, I mean, when are these happening? Right? When do we see peaks in, you know, in pogroms against Jews in Europe and in the vituperative nature of the condemnations of Israel by the Europeans? When we're fighting in Gaza? I mean, this is where we were supposed to have legitimacy, right? We left in 2005, took every Jew, dead and alive, out of Gaza, reinterred bodies of Jews in Jerusalem from Gaza, left lock, stock, and barrel, not one soldier there, not one tank, not one weapon. And we have been pummeled from Gaza, which is run by an illegal terrorist organization. And this has been the cause, the initiator of these massive, hysterical, unhinged, and deeply prejudicial and bigoted European moves against Israel. And, you know, if this is what they do when we leave Gaza lock, stock, and barrel, is there anything at all that we're going to be able to do in Judea and Samaria or in Jerusalem that's going to satisfy them? We left. There are no Jews, none. Judenrein, Gaza, no Jews. There will never be a situation where Judea and Samaria are free of Jews. Same true, of course, of Jerusalem. So is this how they're acting about Gaza? Why on earth do we think that we could possibly, in any way, shape, or form, satisfy their appetite for seeing Jews leave places in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria? We can't. We can't.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert, I'd like to ask you, I mean, you're from Germany, I'd like to ask you about Germany's role in swimming against the European tide on Israel. To what extent can Israel expect that Chancellor Merkel, who is very, very vociferous in her opponent in opposition to the settlement policies, how much can we expect that she'll continue to go to bat for Israel inside the EU institutions? Merkel, as we all know, is strongly pro-Israel, but to what extent is she out of step with the German public opinion, and what kind of price does she pay for it at home?
Look, first of all, the government of Mrs. Merkel, as well as all previous governments of Germany, always stated the special relationship between the State of Israel and Germany, and quoting that the very existence of the State of Israel is a main pillar of German foreign policy. Whether this has proved to be wrong or right is a matter of perception. But what we can see today in Germany is that German citizens who are disclosing themselves as Jews publicly on the streets of Germany, or even only as friends of Israel, are not safe of their lives. And we have seen this last summer. We had violent mobs of demonstrators for the first time since 1945 who were shouting openly under the eyes of local police, death to the Jews, Jews to the gas. They were burning Jewish symbols and Israeli flags. They were waving Hezbollah and Hamas flags, which are considered as terrorist organizations, also in Germany. And you know, all this leads to the fact that German Jews are asking themselves if Germany is still the right place to raise their kids and grandkids. And it's, in my view, just a matter of time until also Christian citizens will ask themselves these questions, because don't forget, the way from the synagogue to the churches are very close. So I think that a democracy can only prevail if it succeeds to protect its minorities. Otherwise, it will fail. But let's come back to the political stage. In relation to the government of Ms. Merkel, I think in general the temperature between the European Union and Israel is very, very cold, and it's approaching kind of a freezing point. We have calls for labeling Israeli products, whether they are produced within proper Israel or the disputed territories, whereas there is no other country in the world where these calls are being heard. Turkey can import their goods, no question if these goods are from North Cyprus. China can import goods into the European Union, no matter where these products are from Tibet. So what we can see here is a massive discrimination of the Jewish state. And I think that criticizing the settlement policy on one hand, without naming Palestinian incitement, without naming the refusal of the Palestinians to accept a definite end of the conflict with Israel, without naming this, you're discriminating Israel and you're discriminating the Jewish people as a whole. And especially from a country like Germany, we may expect to stand firm against these kind of developments and to call out that this is a discrimination, and for moral reasons, for historic and for political reasons, this is the right thing for Ms. Merkel to do, and this is what I would have expected to see from her.
I'd like to ask the European ambassadors, perhaps the Danish ambassador, to respond to what Carolyn said about no matter what Israel does, Europe is gonna bash it.
Well, thank you very much. I am a little bit concerned about the Europe bashing, I must say. There is the allegation that Europe is applying double standards, discriminating. There was the issue of the proportionality and the civilian casualties in the Gaza conflict. Let me make this point. I think Israel should insist that we discriminate you, that we apply double standards. This is because you are one of us. We are not looking to Israel, and sometimes the response on the part of some Israeli interlocutors is, look what's going on in Syria, look what's going on elsewhere. those are not the standards that you are being judged by. It's not the standards that Israel would want to be judged by. So I think you have the right to insist that we apply double standards and put you to the same standards as all the rest of the countries in the European context.
But isn't it kind of patronizing to the Palestinians to say that we hold Israel to a higher standard than we hold you?
I'm not sure it is. I think there is a situation where we recognize that there is a very strong, one very strong party in the conflict, and a much weaker party. In that respect, I think engaging our long-standing partner Israel, with whom we have extensive cooperation in trade and cultural affairs, whatever, in a different fashion that we engage others is natural.
Ambassador Talo, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I completely agree on this fact that there is more interest on Israel, exactly because, like I said, we feel we are part of the same community. It's the same as if something happens inside Italy. Also, the slightest incident, there is a lot of interest. And then can happen terrible things abroad, and there is less interest. Then it's sort of a concentric centers of interest, and Israel is certainly very close to our heart. It is completely normal. It's a fact of perception. Then, again, it's a fact of perception that when you feel that you are criticized, and this is the same when Europeans are criticized, when Israeli are criticized, you focus your attention on criticism. But let's speak about Gaza conflict. During the Gaza conflict, there was an important statement by the European Union asking for disarmament in Gaza. This was important and appreciated. Same, recently, there was a condemn of words and acts that, from the Palestinian side, don't help because they are incitement. We understand your very good points on incitement. These are important aspects. For settlements, we don't agree. But when we don't agree, we are on the same side of many Israelis. It's a point. We are the same side of the Americans. I mean, it's an opinion. One can have a different opinion. We think that these are obstacles to a process that we all want to achieve. And the end of this process is 2 states for 2 peoples, the Jewish people in its own national state and the Palestinian people. But we have to avoid any obstacle. And we find that the settlements are obstacles. But in the same time, Israel has a very good point on incitements, on the terrorist regime in Gaza. It's the European Union who decided that this is a terrorist organization, not others. So one should recognize this.
I'd like to ask both of Aviv and Carolyn to deal with what the ambassador said, that we should be thankful that we're being judged by a different standard.
Well, that's a big dilemma. I served as a diplomat in Europe for many years, and there is something to it. I mentioned right in the beginning that we are like-minded, and I agree that we are different from the rest of our neighborhood. Yet, I think that the way the Europeans are applying it to reality is problematic, because I'm not saying that it can be changed within a day, a month, or a year. It is obvious that any European, be it a leader or a man or a woman on the street, are judging or analyzing the situation in the Middle East, okay? In Israel, around us, what's going on right now in the whole region. They do it from their European, Christian, democratic, Western point of view, because this is how they were raised, this is how they see the world. And some of them don't understand that the clocks in the Middle East tick differently. The mentality of people here is different. And I'm not passing judgment, okay? And if you try to understand what's going on here from those point of views in Europe, you're bound to be mistaken. In this region, we play rugby. And Europe expects us to play rugby with badminton rules. If you play rugby with badminton rules, you're dead. And this is something that we have to explain to our friends in Europe.
So I think that this patronizing attitude towards us, that we should be happy that you have a separate standard for Israel, is really, I'm sorry, is a statement of contempt for our intelligence. I consider it to be an obsession. I consider Europe's keen interest in the Middle East, specifically Israel, to be an obsession. And it's an obsession that Jews have seen from Europeans from the time of Jesus. And we know what it is. That's one thing. The other thing here is, we have this whole common culture. I mean, really? We respect international law. You guys make it up. There is a binding UN Security Council resolution, Chapter 7 from 2001, 1373, that bars every single UN member nation from funding or otherwise supporting in any way terrorist organizations. And you guys are funneling billions of euros into rebuilding terrorist-controlled Gaza. All right? This is in contravention of binding international law that you signed on to. Now, on the other hand, there's imaginary international law that says that you are required to sanction Jewish projects from Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. There is no such binding law. You guys are funding settlements in Western Sahara. You're funding them. You're funding them directly. So, this is not a double standard. This is a singular standard for Israel. It's not about international law. It's about an obsessive, compulsive need to constantly pick at the Jewish state. And no, I don't want to be proud that you're looking at us in a different standard from our neighbors, because you're not looking at our neighbors as human beings. What you're saying is they're objects. The only actor in this entire region are the people they're trying to annihilate. And the only people who are supposed to be judged for our actions, and always poorly, are the people who are doing everything possible, more than Europe, right? More than the United States, more than anybody, in order to protect the lives of the Palestinians. So with all due respect, and I would love it if I could have more respect for Europe, but your treatment of Israel, your singular standard, your obsessive, compulsive need to constantly pick at the Jewish state, right, makes it very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to worry if you made a helpful statement saying, Gaza should be demilitarized. The only way, and you know this, the only way that Gaza will be demilitarized is if Israel reoccupies Gaza. That's the only way. The only military organization here that is not a terrorist organization and is not a terrorist supporting organization is the IDF. And for that, we are calumnied, we are condemned, we are investigated, we are put on trial every single day. Our soldiers are condemned by you. Our soldiers come in and are being called murderers for protecting our families. And I'm sorry, it's very hard for me to feel any respect for this kind of behavior.
I think your point is clear. I'd like to give the European ambassadors a chance to respond to that. Ambassador Var, Ambassador.
Well, that's a kind of hard act to follow. I think part of this whole debate could be a little more clarity on factual sides. I have, in this respect, I've been reading Caroline Glick's book with great interest. And in terms of
soon to be translated into Hebrew.
But yes, I would recommend it. I enjoyed reading it, but there were parts of it I didn't enjoy reading. There were parts on depiction of what European positions are that I didn't enjoy reading, because they simply were not factually correct in the same way that you tend to put measures that are on the part of the European Union directed against the settlements. And we, for our part in Denmark, certainly we make a strong point of not contributing to legitimizing the settlements in the occupied territories. That's part and parcel of the guidance that we are giving to business enterprises. But where I think something happens is when you make that link and say this is directed against the Jewish people and pull out the Jewish card and the anti-Semitic card.
The Jewish card.
That's where the conversation becomes very, very difficult. We, for our part in Denmark, make a clear distinction between what is the State of Israel, where we want to entertain as close relations as we possibly can in every walk of life. But when it comes to settlement, you will see nothing on the part of the government of Denmark that supports settlements or that supports the conduct, because we perceive them to be an obstacle to a two-state solution. And I think it would be useful if we could be accurate and not immediately try to equate a policy on settlements on part of European countries to being a policy on Israel or on Jews. Thank you.
Aviv, as an Israeli diplomat, do you think this is a fair thing to do, to separate the settlements from the Jews, from the Jewish state, or is that a camouflage for something more nefarious?
I don't think you can separate the settlements from the policies of Israeli governments, and I represent the Israeli government, or I represented governments. And if this is the Israeli policy, then there is a need by the Europeans to understand the reasons for that. There's no doubt about the fact that the best tour guide, okay, for this land until this very day is the Bible. You just need to open the Bible, and that's the best tour guide for every tourist coming to the Holy Land. Catering to the ridiculous accusations that Jews have no relations to this country is something that we reject completely. You might have a different political position, and this is, by the way, legitimate, and this is what we are trying to explain in Europe, because, for example, I found out as an Israeli diplomat that we were trying for many years to make the world to see the conflict through Israeli eyes. And one of the bad results was that the world sees Israel through the eyes of the conflict. And there are many other things apart from the conflict. And the settlements is one issue that we have to address. Fact is that the slogan, settlements are an obstacle to peace, this slogan was proven wrong, okay, at least in two cases. The Sinai, and it was already mentioned by the politicians who spoke here today, and in Gaza. And everybody in Israel, and it doesn't matter if it's a right or left, a politician or a citizen, I grew up in Ashkelon, okay? Most of my childhood I spent in this town, and I have many friends. And the school where I studied, to respect my Arab neighbors, was hit by a rocket from the Gaza Strip. So there's definitely something to it. When people say, we left Gaza, we got terror instead. We left Sinai for peace despite settlements. We left Gaza for peace despite settlements. So the slogan, settlements are an obstacle to peace, is ridiculous. Yes, there is a problem in Judea and Samaria. Yes, it is part of the negotiations with the Palestinians. But many governments, including the European Union, are referring to it in a wrong way. And this is our duty to make it clear to them.
If you mentioned something interesting, you said that you went to school in Ashkelon that was bombed. To what degree, and I'll open this to anyone who wants to answer, to what degree does Europe understand or not understand the reality here of the insecurity that people do feel on the streets? That a missile could come crashing through a living room, or that a kid hitchhiking could get kidnapped and killed. To what degree in Italy does the Italian public understand that, or is that something that we just are unable to get across?
I think it's, again, the importance of meeting. And certainly security is a key issue. And now we talked a lot about settlements. we didn't initiate to speak about settlements, so we are not so obsessed. And actually, it happens that we do it, we start to raise this issue after there are new announcements, new initiatives in this sense, and this happens quite frequently, but we never put this at the focus starting with this subject. While security, this is a very important subject, and we agree, it's a key issue, and there should be more awareness about this. That's why we are in favor of having more visits, more visibility, and then don't tell us we are obsessed and we want to have more visibility, because we can also have, when there is visibility, different opinions. But I think that if you share our opinion, that the more you see the things, the more you understand, probably the more people will come here, the more they will understand your problems of security, which actually are shared problems. But we understand that while we are distant, you are on the front line, so you are those who risk much more. And those who are in Ashkelon certainly risk more than those in Tel Aviv, but certainly now we experienced also in Tel Aviv the danger. And here is also the Gaza point. I mean, the nice thing is that we live in countries in Israel and Europe where there are many very different opinions, and we are witnessing this now while we are speaking. And I guess that not the opinions what we are listening are exactly the same of the Israeli government, and then in Israel there exist many other very different opinions. And this is the nice thing. And then, for instance, when we speak about assisting Gaza, we know that the Israeli government is in favor of giving humanitarian aid to Gaza. Then, of course, there is a big problem. How to do this in a condition of security? There was a tripartite agreement recently that was hailed as a good solution. But we are asked to give humanitarian assistance to Gaza. So please don't say that we are helping terrorists. We want to avoid to help terrorists. There are rules within our countries to avoid this. So we are sticking to international law. Then, of course, there can be different opinions on how to do it in the best way. And this is the nice thing, that we have different opinions. We should be proud to have different opinions, because we are part of the free world, of the world where it's important the word freedom, the word life, l'chaim. We share all this.
Mr. Gilbert, let me ask you a question. What can Israel do to improve its situation in Germany in particular, or in Europe as a whole? I mean, how can we make it better?
You know, it's very easy for us Europeans to give Israel advice when having neighbors like Luxembourg, Belgium, San Marino, or even Denmark. But we were talking about common values, and with all respect, Mr. Ambassador, we cannot disconnect European history, which is also Jewish history, when starting to comment on the situation today Israel is. And as I said, with all the respect, your government took during the Holocaust with a try to and successful try to save a lot of its Jewish population. We must not forget that the Holocaust took place in the middle of Europe, and I do not think that the Jewish people really need extra lessons from Europeans in good behavior and morality. And we also shall not forget that Auschwitz has not been a seminar in good behavior. And that's when you say that Europe is sharing common values with Israel, and that's why it has to be treated differently. I think this is the reason exactly why Israel has to be a partner of Europe, and Israel has to be supported by the European Union. And now let's look into Europe. Europe has a track record of decades of failed immigration and integration history. Look what's going on in the streets of Europe with our immigrants, and look what's going on in Israel with its immigrants, and how immigrants have been integrated into this country. And I think here Israel is a very good example for Europe, and not the other way around.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap up. Let me just give the Danish ambassador the last word to respond to that.
Well, I think that it's absolutely correct that there is a problem of integration of different cultures in Europe at this point in time. I entirely agree with that. We have been struggling in Denmark with that, though perhaps less so than in other countries. But I think that's where, in fact, we can have a dialogue, and where some of the common values that I'm arguing for come to the fore. I think we might be able to learn a lot from you in that process as part of that dialogue and draw some conclusions. Just as some of the standards that are being applied, there's been a long debate in Israel about the detention facilities. There may be an issue of dialogue that we can pursue together. So my point, and I think it's being distorted a little bit, is that the point is that Israel, in its interaction, should not be telling us, why are you not concentrating on other countries in the Middle East, because it's much worse than here, or don't criticize us, look at what's going on around you. And we're saying, we are conducting that discussion with you on the same value basis, and therefore you should be looking to that rather than to point to a situation that looks different in some of your neighboring countries, because those are not the ones you want to compare yourself to.
Let me try to synthesize what Mr. Gilbert said. And what I understood him saying is, with Europe's history towards the Jews, you have a little chutzpah coming and preaching to us. And then the question is, I think that's what he was saying, and how do you respond to that?
I don't think this is preaching. I don't think the Europeans are preaching to Israel. I think actually, and I'm now quoting from memory from your great writer Amos Oz, who has in one of his pieces the metaphor of the wagging Victorian headmistresses that come around and wag their finger. I think actually that's a good point to say that's not the way to go. What I think is the way to go is to try to prime and to nurture and to support elements that can bring us closer to what we want to attain here, namely peace and reconciliation and the two-state solution. So if you're perceiving us as being wagging our index finger, I'm sorry about that, because I don't think that's the way to go, and I don't think that's where the European Union is wanting to go. But we do want to be supportive. We do want to be priming a process towards peace in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have to wrap up because Ambassador Shapiro is going to address us.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. I hope you enjoyed that diplomatic fireworks display. Thank you especially to our own Carolyn Glick for always being interesting.